with, after skipping 2 weeks of More Equal Animals, we're back with Allocating Natural Resources. I'm joined with Chuck, Mike, and Ami of the Eden community. And we're going to break this down. How you guys doing today?
Doing great.
Very good. We had great pregame talk about pinball machines and all the Hanukkah fun things in the world going on today.
If you're a pinball person, drop your favorite pinball machine in the comments.
Definitely. Mm-hmm. And Chuck, this is your first time doing this with us, so I didn't realize that was the case, and I'm really glad you're here.
Thanks for the renewed invite.
The voice of More Equal Animals himself. Cool. All right. Mike, you always have the awesome overview, so if you want to take a shot at this one.
Not only that, 60 seconds ago, I was like, oh crap, I gotta have my document up. So I actually have it in front of me. Yeah, so this is probably a sentence read out of the book, given how well it's constructed, but the summary for this chapter is: the only fair, logically consistent allocation of property is one that's fair to all generations across time, which leads to the idea of lending each person their share of the earth only for their lifetime, and then paying back that loan to make the next generation whole.
Awesome.
What do you mean awesome? This is really tough for the white male population of this room and in the general audience, I guess, because we have it, right? We don't want to give it up. What is that?
This is such a challenging chapter for me that I'm still unresolved about. I love this idea. I think it is logically consistent in so many ways, and given my political bent, to the degree I have a bent, and the people, the crowds I hang in, this is not a popular topic, and I get why, but I haven't 100% resolved where I am on this topic. So I this is like the last what do you call that? The last frontier for me to iron out.
Yeah. Well,
so let's get that done today. Why not?
Yeah. No big deal.
We'll button it all up.
I come from a perspective that's only like begrudgingly accepting of the concept of owning land to begin with. So for me, this is easy. I'm just like, sweet. Finally, somebody like merged the two like messed up, seemingly contradictory perspectives, and one being like just almost like the divine right of kings to like whatever you lay claim to, and the other one being, no, we have to consider like other generations besides us, and it's not all about who grabs a hold of it now, So.
Yeah, so let's start off with some conceptual background, actually, because I think doing this sequentially might be a little hard to follow. So some background points. When we talk about resources, we're largely going to be talking about ownership of land. That functions currently through title, which is a publicly recorded idea, right? You buy a house and it gets recorded publicly that you now own that house. That system has been around, depending on which country and how far back you go, for hundreds of years in some cases. And before that system came into being, there was this shift from whatever was happening before that to this system is the way we do things. And so that's kind of the current paradigm. And the issue with that is whoever's alive today gets to buy land that won't be available once it's bought to whoever comes later. And this is trying to balance that equation, where where so you're adding the time dimension to the
It
typical.
will be available, but it's going to be very expensive and maybe prohibitively expensive for them
Right.
to buy.
Right. So that's kind of the thinking behind this. Why is this? Why am I uncomfortable with this, and why is this an unpopular topic when I bring it up in my circles? Because this is a very anti-typical property way to relate to property. It flies in the face of property rights, the way almost anyone who will utter the phrase property rights will talk about property rights. So,
and it's also probably one of the first topics or areas of this book that opens up the possibility of being okay with coercive authority, right, over you. This is buying into a coercive system to some extent. If you're going to opt out of this, concept, then you're going to hurt.
Well, and further tweaks on this is that this whole book is based on the idea of a peace treaty. So if we all agree that this is how we should allocate our resources, whatever we mean by that, because we have to acquire our resources first, we can just agree that this is how it's going to work, and then it's consensually coercive, if it's coercive at all. So we can agree to this under the peace treaty and have it be a self-consistent thing. But it does have that coercive element. The other critical thing I've come across the more I've talked to people about this, particularly in the blockchain world, but this could be done via law theoretically. If this is a set percentage, if we set this up as an algorithmic thing, then you don't have so much opportunity as we currently have to allocate resources in a corrupt manner. You can just have the algorithm do it, and it can be equal. It can be everybody's treated the same way kind of algorithm. Anyway, anyone else have any pre-thoughts before we start highlighting?
I think with the blockchain, it's easier because we're so attached to the geography of the world and the land that we perceive around us. But with blockchain, it's new, it's fresh, and you can start over with new rules. And I think initially Dan said 5% inflation is okay for a blockchain, because if you own some tokens, it's a certain percentage, and if you're very rich and you own a large percentage, that's okay. But then it deteriorates your percentage because of inflation, and then by 90 years or something like that, it's a much lower percentage, and there's a chance for the new generation to take over or acquire a larger part of the blockchain. So it can have a natural turnover, which is gradual.
And in blockchain, we have different resources than land. We have resources that we do need to split up, and we do need to distribute somehow. Even initial emission of a coin, you got to figure out, well, how do I distribute this? And there's been numerous ways of going about that. So we do have resources that do need to be distributed somehow. And with DeFi and these DAOs I'm learning a lot about recently, someone's going to try this and a billion other things. Like, we can just make any rules, start a new blockchain with any set of rules, and people will. It's a free market in blockchain, and so people will. So it's going to be cool to see some of these play out.
Totally. Yeah.
All right, who wants to deal with? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
That was a great. You guys hit on some really cool points and ways that this all ties into blockchain and everything.
So I think we should kick off this whole conversation or kick off part 2. I don't know what I'm talking about. We should get the cookie analogy really clear, because we refer to that a lot throughout this chapter.
Yeah.
So anyone want to discuss the Dan's cookie story?
I feel like the cookie story is just like, it becomes slang now. We just say like the cookie.
That's why I want to make sure people know what we're talking about.
Yeah, I've highlighted it. Someone else take it away though.
Well, if you're going to split something up between two people, one person does the cutting and the other person does the choosing, and the fairness is just built into it. I don't know how more succinctly I can put it.
Yeah.
I like that concluding statement here where he says, by agreeing to this algorithm, there were no more disputes, and therefore we didn't need a higher authority to resolve disputes for us. You could say that we had a moral hazard-free algorithm for building consensus and avoiding a physical altercation under the law of the jungle.
Dispute was impossible.
You split.
That happens if your sibling is close to you in age, not if you're 10 years apart. And
right,
because
if
you're bigger, you need the bigger part, right? You're going to starve to death.
Yeah.
If your sustenance is based on cookies, you're going to starve to death anyway.
Yeah.
True.
And if you're 3 kids, then it's more complicated, but there's an algorithm for that too.
Let's also make a call out to Dan's brilliant parents for coming up with this idea. I've never heard this kind of thing, so I don't think it's common, but it's a brilliant way to stop disputes between kids.
I don't know if I grew up with 7 siblings, but and they were all like 10 years older than me, so it was a bit crazy, but they all knew everything and I looked up to them. But I grew up with this. It was if you're going to split something, one person does the splitting, the other person does the choosing.
That's cool.
What if it's house chores? That's a negative thing, not a positive.
We didn't have
thing.
sovereignty over. We didn't have sovereignty over those, over choosing those.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you were just being told what's your part.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the first thing I have highlighted is, I think,
you were just being told what's your.
Sorry, I had my
I was going to say, Ami's lips are not moving, but first thing I have highlighted is the after much thinking paragraph, the third sentence, which is the core question here. How do we allocate the natural unearned resources of the universe fairly across all generations? Which rings of a question Bill McDonough asked, which if you don't know him, check him out because he's awesome. But honoring, in my mind, I mean, I'm using big fat words here like honoring, but it's pretty awesome. Kind of like the seventh generation commandment of the Iroquois, I think is the proper name. It's been a while since I heard that. But this idea of like there are generations coming, and we talk about them like, oh, that's our progeny, and we're leaving a world to them, and yet we don't generally deal with the world that we are in fact leaving with them. So this question at least grapples with that question. Next highlight I have is the next page. Anyone have anything else?
I'm back and forth. Well, just for the sake of condensing this into I just think the questions are important to get some of these for later use. How do we determine what is yours and what's mine? Where do these rights come from? I actually take notes in the paper book, so I got to look here.
You have a paper book?
Made from trees.
Which is a great. This is another Bill McDonough quote. He talks about books and paper, and he says, he goes, look at the design of a tree. You've got something that I can't do it justice, but grows in size and provides shade to animals and is symbiotic with plants. And he goes through this long list of just all this stuff that a tree accomplishes. And he pauses for a moment and he goes, so let's cut it down and write on it.
Yeah. It's kind of brutal.
Well, it's better than writing on scrolls or stones or
you say squirrels?
clay tablets.
Scrolls. I'm way into scrolls. I
Scrolls.
think we need
Yeah.
I think we need to bring the scrolls back personally, but that's another story.
I like heating myself with trees. Implicit in that question, how do we allocate natural under resources across all generations, is I guess every or most cultures, one of their founding myths or founding statements is the imperative that they are to conquer the earth, right? That they are to control the earth. And you have to get to that point first where you believe that it's your responsibility to be a steward or, controller of reality, and then it's your imperative to do that not only in the present but going forward to the future. And if you can't agree on that, it's kind of hard to get any further.
Yeah. Core agreement. All right, 135. What do you guys got?
So third paragraph, I'll read the whole thing. It should be obvious that proving clear title to anything is impossible. And we'll have to deal with that statement because it's a fat statement. Furthermore, one must ask the question, why do Adam and Eve have the right to control the definition of legitimate ownership of property for all eternity? Is each new generation bound to recognize the property rights allocated by the prior generation? I think as we go through this paragraph, the questions get more accessible. The last question, while an answer might not be easy, at least is easy to relate to. It makes sense. But this gets at the heart of like the existing property title system. It should be obvious that proving clear title to anything is impossible, right? Why is that statement there? I'll take a crack at it. I don't want to say this authoritatively, but here's my relationship to that sentence. There's this long lineage of human beings that we don't get to talk to and negotiate like, wait, did you own this or did Bob own this? We don't get to have that conversation generations and generations back. And we've gone through periods of something like a peace treaty existing and then law of the jungle taking over, right? Country existed, Prussia existed for a while. Actually, I shouldn't use a specific example because I want to make an example that I don't think applies in that case. But, country A exists and then war B happens and then country C comes out of that. So we have these times of peace treaty with law of the jungle interruption and then new peace treaty, or just peace treaty and new peace treaty with no war in between, maybe a revolution in between. So we have these transitions where sometimes the property title has been maintained and sometimes it hasn't. So we have even if we had a system and could talk to everyone, we still have interruptions to it that break the continuity of that system through time. So proving clear title to anything. Yeah, we haven't had a blockchain starting from caveman days. And again, even if we did, in the case of a war, do you then have a peace treaty about how title works in a war? Like you have these interruptions with law of the jungle that kind of just say, well, whatever's on chain doesn't matter. Let's start a new record. And that new record also, critically, is arbitrarily started as, okay, raise your hand if you own something. Say what you own. Like, how do you establish who owns what after one of those interruptions? Sometimes it's the nation, the country owns everything. The government owns everything. And sometimes it's okay, if you own a house on a land, you own that.
Yeah,
it's all over the place.
If you're big, if you have the largest club, step forward and claim what is yours. Yeah.
Yep.
And we needn't look any further back into history in the U.S. to just point to Hurricane Katrina and say there was an event where hundreds, if not thousands, of people lost all title to their records, and homes that had been in families for generations were suddenly lost to that family because they couldn't prove that they owned it, even though they'd been occupying that home for several generations into the past. But
which is an interesting and maybe trivial caveat here. right, you establish ownership in the current system by having some crusty filing cabinet in some crusty building that has a piece of paper that says a parcel number in your name. That's how you own stuff. That's the reality of how you own stuff. And it's not more romantic than that. That's how that actually is. And then something comes through and destroys that crusty old building, and it's just gone. How do you reestablish ownership rights? We have to make it up again.
Yep.
That's pretty extraordinary. I don't think we normally think about the nuts and bolts of how this stuff actually looks, but that's the case right now.
Yeah, how weak the actual system is.
A lot of people can't conceive of any system ending, right? I know, Mike, you're on board with deeply diving into Dune. But in one of the later books, there's the sisterhood, right? The Bene Gesserit, they're multi-generational. They're like thousands of years old. They've got plans that go forward and backwards through time. And the tyrant, Leto, he's the king, he's the emperor, the god or emperor for thousands of years, and he controls the whole universe. And then he disappears, not to spoil it for anybody, but a few thousand years later, one of these sisters comes across this big store that he left for the future, and in it he left a note saying, even your sisterhood will disappear, even you and all of your plans will disappear, and they'll be for nothing. And it was crushing to her, like the idea that that yes, everything that we've worked for is going to disappear at some point. And to fit yourself into that, and then think about multi-generational property rights from that perspective, you have to work hard to defend your property rights in the here and now, because it will disappear. It is temporary.
Well, and the other really interesting piece in this topic, I've been reading about, we at Clarion have been reading a lot about digital identity recently, and like in crypto, we talk about the unbanked. That's a very common thing that we're related to already. Well, there's also the unidentified, so to speak, someone who has no means of proving their identity. No government issued driver's license, state ID. They have nothing. They're just who they are. They got a name, and their family knows their name. Like, that's the extent of their identity. So if they apply for a bank account, what's your name? Like, that's as far as the identity proof can go, because there's no authority to prove their identity. Mm-hmm. So if you think about the consequence of that paper in the crusty building we described earlier has my name, which I've proven to someone at the time of recording that I am that person, and the parcel number. Well, if they can't prove who they are and there is no parcel number, they are, in this system, incapable of owning land. There is no way to have them own land by the current title system. That's also pretty interesting. And again, something we don't think about. We in the first world, big old air quotes on first world, we just don't think about that stuff. But there is a whole world, so to speak, billions of people, something like 2 billion people, I think the stat was, who have no means of proving their identity. That's a different world than we live in.
It kind of reminds me, though, of in that other world, that a lot of this is just familial. There's just lineage that tracks this, and it's like that large intact families that provide you with identity, and then that prove your identity to third parties without the need for any sort of central entity that declares it to be so. And it's those relationships over time that just cement this in place. And if the only way that gets wrecked is if an entire family and all knowledge of that family gets wiped out, essentially. And at which point it doesn't matter really that much, because they don't own any land anymore anyway, because they're gone. But as long as one person around remembers and there's trust, then
Which kind of brings us to the last sentence on that page. In the jungle, possession is 9/10 of the law. Possession, and as you're saying, some kind of agreement.
Yeah. I mean, think about the rye stones, like those giant stones that the Polynesian islanders had. They didn't even write, like they tracked ownership just by stories. Like if they changed possession, they didn't even move the stone because they're so massive. They just stayed where they were. But it was just a collective agreement of the people involved that now it belonged to like this other family on a different island. Anyway, just like a different world.
Early consensus algorithm, right? Enough of the story producers say the same thing about that rock.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay.
Next page. Everybody ready for that? So first paragraph, last sentence. If you can maintain control over property for long enough, then people forget how you obtained it and it becomes yours. I think we've beaten that topic plenty at this point, but there's a nice concise phrasing of it.
Time is like the thief in that case. Like it's like just conquer long enough that everyone forgets that you were a conqueror, but it's like, who wasn't? Problematic.
Yeah. And now the timeline, the time that it takes to conquer is diminished because they control it's easy to control what people think now. You can convince large populations that the world has changed in no time. In 2 years here we've anyway. Don't need to get on this. In 2 years, there's been significant changes to the way that people perceive things, and it's a lot of it is top down.
Yep. Here's some. I missed some comments. I didn't miss them entirely, but I'm just like not keeping up. There's back to the cookie thing. I said, well, first of all, there was. Interestingly, this is also how addicts split up their drugs.
Oh, really? Nice.
And I said, yeah, that's insightful. We just grabbed whatever cookies we could when no one was looking, like bandits in the night. And then Daniel says,
that's law of the jungle.
There's quite a bit of that going on here too. Hide it away for later. And then some other thoughts. If people could all agree on something, then Git wouldn't have a fork option. And it's kind of good thing though. If we all agreed, we'd be done. Game complete. So
that's a very deep thought.
Yeah, you wouldn't need any exchange like Bullish or Binance or NASDAQ. Everybody would be content with what they have. Nobody would buy and sell.
We just all merge into the infinite oneness, and then that'd be boring. It'd be like, well,
we won.
What's the point?
Yeah.
All right.
Next paragraph. I think I started the third sentence. Systems set up by mutual consent in one generation cannot be binding on subsequent generations because contracts are only valid if the parties have the ability to consent and are negotiating as equals. Which I suppose translates to the current title system is a non-consensual contract as people come into the world. They don't get to agree to it consensually.
Right. Which you hear a lot with people that are upset with the current political, framework, like younger people. They're like, I was just born into this. I didn't get to choose like what form of government we have. I think there's always that sense among younger people, like, I got the raw end of the deal here. Like, I was just stuck in this situation. I didn't choose my parents, or I didn't choose my country, or etc.
Oh, but you can study hard and you can get a scholarship, and you can change your future. And there's another problem here that the generations are not transitioning at a specific date on the calendar. It's not like 20 years pass today we're switching over to the next generation. There's no generation X, Y, Z, boom, whatever you want to call them. It's very gradual and they're mixed.
Yeah. Well, and Lovejoy, to your point, actually, it's a really, really good thing, really powerful point to emphasize. You don't get to choose your parents. You don't get to choose the lottery of where you landed in life when you were born. We could treat this, so it is a valid way to treat it as that's just how time works. Get over it, right? Like that may be the conclusion here. It's not an invalid conclusion because it applies to every other aspect of life.
Yeah.
But the things that we, while a peace treaty, we can't make an agreement about who your parents are and where you were born. We can make an agreement potentially about how we allocate resources.
Yeah.
Potentially.
Right. Really, you're still concerned about this chapter, I think.
Oh yeah.
Potentially.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's clear that practice. Back to my book. Anyone got anything?
The end of the next paragraph also gets into this interruption I've talked about. That said, classifying war, theft, and fraud as misconduct assumes an existing peace treaty. And under the law of the jungle, such misconduct is neither more good nor bad than a shark eating another fish. And I think this is like a central point of the book that this point's made in a bunch of different ways in this book, but it's why I like the idea of a peace treaty. You either have a peace treaty or you're clubbing each other over the head with a club.
With a shark. No,
that's clubbing with a bat. Can you do that? You don't bat with a bat. Yeah, this is a critical piece, right? When the peace treaty breaks down, how do you measure that, right? Is it fair the Europeans coming into North and South America and just killing and taking over? Is fair even the right word? It's law of a jungle. Like it or not, it's not right in any way that we typically mean the word right, but that's law of a jungle. It's how it works. Might made, well, we say might makes right, but might made the way things are.
Yeah. You keep going. It happens all the time, but that adage that if you're not a communist when you're a teenager, you have, what is it? No heart. And if you're not a capitalist when you're an adult, you have no brain or something like that, right? Whatever it is, but it grows, right? Your perception of the world grows, and there are certain naive ways of looking at history and at the history of property, and then there are some more developed ways of looking at it. And for example, a naive way might be like, because of the conquering of North and South America and everything that went with that, somebody now owes somebody else something today. That whole concept of reparations for very, very, very far in the past, whatever, that's all relative, but the concept of reparations for something that somebody else did, that's all tied up in here. And if you can't get over the fact that history happens, and you just have to wake up and learn history and then deal with it, it's kind of hard to participate in real society.
Yeah, that's really interesting, right? If your great however many greats grandfather was an asshole and treated somebody poorly, and you've inherited what he had, then are you at fault for what he did? Obviously, that doesn't add up. But if you have resources that came from him, right, it gets messy. It's not a cut and dry thing.
No, yeah.
It's tempting though to hide in specifics like that. Like, I mean, I could point to my abolitionist ancestors and be like, I wasn't part of it, but I also spend time with the Lakota in Pine Ridge every year, and so for me, it's like, Jesus, it's not that far removed what's happened and where that ended up, and for them it's still ongoing. Like like just a quick recap, you know, Trail of Tears, Lakota won the fight against the US, and the US sued for peace. And they're like, okay, we'll give you peace. We wanted peace to begin with. And then the US said, because the US was fighting, a few other battles simultaneously, and they didn't want to like also be fighting Lakota, who were like picking them off here and there and winning these battles, surprisingly, to them. And then so the US sued for peace. The Lakota said, okay, we agree to your peace. They had a treaty, a couple different treaties. Then the US just broke the treaty when it was convenient to them. Took the land, marched, forced the people to march, to where they wanted to resettle them. And then over the course of, a couple generations, like proceeded to like just completely dismantle their way of life, take their children, put them in boarding schools, cut their hair off, make them speak English, forbid speaking their own language. And then when that wasn't enough, they created programs to move the children, or like the people that wanted opportunities in cities, off the land, off the reservations, into, like Denver, other cities around. They gave them money to go live in the city and basically be on the dole. You know what I mean? Like, this has been a long multi-generational process of like assimilating a people, like first, after like destroying their entire way of life, essentially, like, and assimilating them into this greater, Borg-like civilization that we have. And, it's hard to look at that and be like, well, history just happened, because those people are still living that history. They're still like dealing with like the fallout from all of that happening, and it being beyond their capacity to adapt to at the time. And they're still living people, and it's hard for me. It's hard for me to just be like, like there's still, even if we know, we can say like, well, yeah, like law of the jungle is a thing. It's like, well, there still should be some moral indignation, like that, we like we shouldn't countenance that sort of thing to continue, like, I guess, and if possible, you know what I mean?
Well, I think if nothing else, that points at actions are being taken with money we've handed over that are against at least some of our morals, right? That's the big takeaway for me. Talking about right or wrong there is probably pointless, if not at least really, really tough.
Well, there's no one to bring to account, really. Like, those people are all dead, like you point out, and it's just like we've inherited the continuation of that situation, essentially, which is true all over the world, in many different scenarios. So it's like, well, what do we do? Because, Chuck brought up reparations, and I was like, it's a weird topic, it's like, how do you...
What form does a reparation take? Is it just hand out dollars? Oh, okay. Like, do you give? It's hard to quantify that, right?
And for the Lakota, it's a really interesting situation, and I don't want to side rail us too much, but like, they actually have a treaty that granted pretty much the entire middle of the United States to them.
Yep.
That is still valid, and in fact, now it's coming to the end of its. Like, they leased that land to the U.S. for 7 generations. Well, it's the 7th generation now. And so that treaty is basically over, and the Lakota have legal right to reclaim that territory. But now it's back to the law of the jungle talk, because is the U.S. just going to be like, okay, well, you're right, like, have your land back, like, we'll just back off and let you have like the entire middle of the United States? Like,
well, and do they maintain title records, or is there an independent system that says that the people who live on the land and own houses own that land, right? It has gotten messy.
Well, the
for
treaty
sure.
still, the treaty like has been, there is still a treaty. I mean, the treaty is recognized, it's like documented, and it specifies like a geographic area according to like certain markers. So like really, like all they have to do is legally all they have to do is go according to the terms of the treaty, is ride a horse to the points of the boundary and reclaim it and put markers there and say, it's ours again. But the question is, can they enforce it? You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah,
right. Which comes back to another core point of the book of independence, right? They don't have law of the jungle power. They don't have their independence to be a negotiating force in that document.
Right.
And between countries, if you have a peace treaty and you've pissed off the other person and you're the weaker country, you don't have as much negotiating power. So yeah, there's a lot of harsh realities here that watching of the Discovery Channel can help elucidate. All right.
Daniel chimed in real quick just to wrap that up. In Australia, things like this happened only 50 or so years ago, stealing children and all that. There is a movie about it, Rabbit Proof Fence, which I've been meaning to watch and I haven't watched. Thanks for reminding me.
And same thing in Canada.
Yep, Canada's definitely
it's brutal.
50 years, really?
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah. I mean, the boarding schools in the U.S. like only got shut down in the 1960s or 70s or something.
Wow.
It wasn't that long ago. Yeah. Part of our unpleasant history.
So let's see. Next thing I have, I don't know what I'm circling here. Hold on a sec. Yeah, he says from the perspective of a community where all rights are derived from a peace treaty among consenting independent individuals, we must ask ourselves, how should we negotiate? That's like really the crux of the peace treaty and how that would work, and where rights come from. He asked earlier where rights come from. This is an option, and it seems to be the only self-consistent option. And then the next paragraph, third-ish sentence. Imagine you were tasked with the job of dividing the universe among individuals in all generations, and that someone who doesn't like you got to decide which slice you get and which generation you were born into. Would you give the first generation the right to allocate to future generations? Would you give the victor the spoils of war? Would you want to leave it up to chance? Historically speaking, the odds would not be in your favor of getting the better piece of the cookie. And again, I think this is
about the whole universe, so it's a big place.
Yeah,
you're gonna find something to do with what you get.
Ami, I grant you Neptune. You take Neptune, and I'll own some land on Earth.
Well, the universe is bigger than the solar system.
Okay, then I give you Alpha Centauri.
Yeah. How about you take the rest of the universe, and I'll just take Earth?
Oh wow!
I mean, Alpha Centauri is prime real estate in the local system. So
yeah,
I have to check the planets around it. Yeah.
Not to be a downer again, but yeah,
go for it. Let's hear it, Lovejoy.
But back to Earth again. I was just thinking. Okay, so like if you look at this by like an analogy, so like native people in the world kind of got the raw end of the deal and got moved on the reservations and partially genocided and all that, and now we're the descendants of those people, and we're like living in these so-called modern society, and now there's this new plan that we will own nothing and we'll be happy, and all the ability, like all the single family houses are being bought up by large corporations, and pretty soon will we essentially be living in like a new modern reservation, and will the powers that be just be like, well, like you can't sorry,
take your kids,
like will their children will their children just be like, well, that's just the way it went, like you didn't have any power to, you know what I mean? Like,
It is an exact parallel. It
sitting
is a perfect parallel.
where we are now, you know, it kind of like raises an interesting like moral question. Like, if we can see that that's happening to us now, and we can put ourselves in that same position, like, how should we act with respect to both the past and the future?
And no one's safe there. Let's say you're one of the people who own property.
Mm-hmm.
You can own the property, no problem. We're going to increase property taxes, right? There's a lot of ways to have you not really own your property. Yeah, good job getting us down. Good job, Lovejoy. That's a good example.
That's what they call me, Lovejoy. Today I'm down joy or something like that.
No joy.
No joy. All right, guys. That's the chapter on allocating natural resources. It just really, for the same reason, it keeps Mike awake at night, you know, for different reasons.
All right, next paragraph, about halfway through. All wealth is derived from the natural unearned resources extracted in the past and traded amongst prior generations. Sure, people mix their labor with things to make the natural resources more valuable, but that doesn't negate their dependence upon the natural resources. Many of these resources are consumed in the process and no longer exist. All that remains are other forms of wealth accumulated by the consumption of oil, soil fertility, and rainforests. And I think the two underpinning concepts here worth drawing out are, it was originally, as far as I understand it, John Locke, who said, you own the property that you work, right? If you develop a tree so that it produces more fruit and you pick the fruit, I mean, in simple terms, if you go pick the fruit from a tree, you've spent your effort to pull fruit off of a tree, that fruit is yours. It doesn't make any sense any other way. And so the concept of homesteading in property right terms, that's the term that's used. Homesteading is I'm going to some place that naturally existed without me. I'm adding labor of some kind, mixing it with the resources. And then I own the mix of, I actually end up owning the resource, but I certainly own the resources that got mixed with my labor.
Mm-hmm. You're adding value, therefore you're kind of creating.
So does that mean even if you own nothing and you're happy because you are renting your house, if you're improving it and maintaining it, then you own it, but you're not owning it?
No, because
law?
the homesteading starts with untitled land. You can only homestead stuff that's not already owned by someone else. Good question, though.
Daniel, another one. I'd be fine with owning nothing as long as I could still use stuff. Their wording was, you will own nothing, though. I'd be fine with, we will own nothing. Yeah, that's a very like creepy distinction.
Yeah.
It's like, wait.
Yeah, there's someone hiding behind that. You will own nothing.
Yeah.
Who's saying that?
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, that's the feudal lord who owns the filing cabinet. Right. Whoever owns that filing cabinet is the lord, and you're welcome to work the land. You're welcome to do whatever you want on it, but he's the one who judges whether or not you own it.
Sounds like a very bad elite version of Fight Club. Just blow up the crusty buildings.
Yeah.
Yeah, with the Katrina hurricane, didn't they have a backup of that rusty filing cabinet? Or maybe they do have a backup, but then they looked at it and they said, we might as well just not tell anybody about this backup. Let's just say it's gone.
Yeah.
Because it's better for us. The people
There's
behind
that
you will own nothing.
Yeah. It was one of the prime targets of any revolution is to destroy records, right?
And grab land.
Yeah.
This is another digital identity thing, right? If you can hold your own records, I was on a crypto exchange years ago, and as Mt. Gox and plenty of other crypto exchanges at the time, they fold, they get hacked, they're fraudulent, and there was a class action on one of the exchanges I had held crypto on. And the class action required you to provide proof of the funds you have, but the exchange, the site where I would download those records doesn't exist anymore.
Yep.
So I would have had to download the records and
timestamp it and
yeah.
It's just a text file.
Yeah.
Or it's
so
yeah.
PSA, if you own crypto, you don't own it if it's on an exchange. No keys to the crypto, no ownership.
Yeah, there's a meme. Your keys, your crypto. Not your keys, not your crypto. And it has these cute dogs. Your keys.
Proof of keys, I think, is in January sometime. So if you don't know about the proof of keys ceremony, look it up and verify. Make sure you know what you're talking about. Proof of keys is a big deal. I think it is January. Anybody know that?
Mm-mm.
Okay.
But we'll look it up. That's a good reminder. I also just tell people, if you're going to keep any of your stuff on exchanges, I don't care how much you trust the exchange or think they're on the up and up, like take lots of screenshots, like keep all your records anyway, download Excel files from the web, from the exchange, like keep it up to date, because I had a friend that transferred something off of one of these exchanges and it just never made it to the blockchain, but it disappeared from their account.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And it was an internal accounting error. Like they thought they sent it, but they didn't. And so they deducted it from the centralized ledger, but did not add it to the blockchain. And so
it's like the opposite of double spend.
Yeah. Exactly.
Zero spend.
We sent your money somewhere. I'm pretty sure.
You should use exchanges like you use a public bathroom.
Oh, those are words of wisdom.
I think I need a T-shirt that says that.
Yeah.
Walk in, be careful, don't touch anything, and get out.
Yeah, touch as few things as you can. Yeah, exactly.
Don't hang around.
Yeah, that's a great one, Ami. We got to start a merchandise section on this for this series.
They got a lot of highlights coming up, so
all right, bring it.
Next paragraph. In order to keep things fair between generations, I propose that each person should be lent a share of the Earth's resources for the duration of a long human life. And in terms of, in economic terms, that would be current income, if you will, right? It's a cash flow of sorts, rather than an ownable asset. So rather than owning land, it would be flowing through you during your lifetime, so to speak. I think that's interesting. Especially talking about it as a loan is pretty interesting.
Yeah. This is based upon the premise that members in one generation would never agree to give the previous generation more favorable terms, assuming all generations were represented by competent attorneys.
It's also an interesting question. Do you divide the entire Earth? Do we include oceans? Do we include uninhabitable areas by the current population? Do you divide it by some theoretical distribution of human beings across time? Like I don't know how that math would work out. I've never actually thought about that part of it.
You talk about theory. There's this great theory, and we know it's going to happen eventually. But we're going to be mining asteroids, right? And it doesn't make any sense to me personally, but there's an argument against gold right now that says, oh, we're just going to get it out of asteroids soon. So it's like supply doesn't even matter right now, right? And it's like, well, that's not happening yet.
Yeah,
it's going to happen, sure, but there's still very much supply fundamentals in play, right, for precious metals. So like, sure, you could say we control the whole universe, but just go and get it now. Just show me that you can find an asteroid, and then I'll believe you that supply and demand doesn't exist, right?
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, it's a bit like saying, I'm going to take both halves of the cookie because I know where the other cookie jar is, and I'll, I'll give it to you later. Trust me, like this cookie's worthless. Like,
This cookie doesn't mean anything. You
Yeah,
don't
this cookie.
want
You don't
Yeah.
want this cookie. Oh, I had a thought, but it's gone.
So next paragraph, I got the whole thing highlighted. From this perspective, each year some percentage of the Earth's resources should be redistributed to the current generation, such that over one lifetime, the resources, wealth, are passed fairly, evenly, from one generation to the next. If we assume most people live less than 100 years, then a resulting rate of inheritance would be around 5% per year. This would redistribute 99.5% of initial wealth over 100 years. This redistribution is nothing more than a loan repayment by one generation and a loan issuance to the next.
Yeah. This like this makes me again think about the Lakota perspective. Like the next 7 generations is they think 300 years. And it's like, well, we are borrowing this from like the 7th generation, essentially, from now. So, and then we have to repay it, hopefully with some dividends too, to the future generations. Like this idea of leaving things better. This kind of builds in that idea of leaving things as good as you found them, or better.
Or better is the key. Yeah. Does this account for people who capitalize on what they have been lent? You know, do you take your talents and put them in the ground and then dig them up at the end of your life, or do you invest and make the world a better place? And then what happens with what you have actually accomplished in your life? Are you able to pass that down to your progeny or not?
I think perhaps one of the key distinctions to be made, one of the key distinctions I think I would make in trying to resolve a piece of my unresolved brain about this is so many people agree with that kind of sentiment that maybe we should take responsibility about that individually and do something about that, right? Create a charity of some kind. But we could do that as a charity, right? Is that something we put in our peace treaty? Is that something that is worth imposing on some number of people who don't agree, who don't want to spend their money that way, right?
Yeah.
There's going to be, we could find a whole bunch of people who agree, yeah, let's put that in the peace treaty. I'm willing to put money toward that. But is that a proper function of governance, or is that a charity? Is that a charity that somebody should form and we should all join, rather than expect the governance system to do that? Right?
Yeah. Well, there's a whole bunch of charitable actions that have been taken over by the government, right? I mean, you look at healthcare, for example, which used to be done on a more charitable basis anyway. But yeah, you're forcing people to buy into I don't know. Yeah, it comes down to coercive authority. Again, the whole chapter is about you're allowing some sort of coercion over your life, and your generations, I guess. Yeah.
The one thing I wanted to get back to was from the previous paragraph, is Dan really like highlighted the fact that, he says, sure, people mix their labor with things to make natural resources more valuable, but that doesn't negate their dependence upon the natural resources. Many of these resources are consumed in the process and no longer exist. All that remains are other forms of wealth accumulated by the consumption of oil, soil fertility, and rainforests. So it's like he's pointing to the fact that the wealth isn't the money that is derived from the consumption of natural resources. The wealth is the natural resources. We can't like burn down all the forest, harvest all the forests and mine all the ore and do all the stuff, and then like just have a bunch of money in banks and then pass that on to the children and be like, we gave you all the wealth. It's like, no, we need to pass the natural resources to future generations, because that's the actual form of wealth. The resources, not
but
like
the
converted
humans
into.
themselves are a resource, a natural resource. Humanity is a natural resource.
Yeah.
If we're not going to maintain humanity just as we maintain soil and water, then what are we passing on as a corpus of natural resources, right? I'm watching the new Foundation series, right? Asimov's Foundation trilogy is fantastic, right? It's about the collapse of a galactic empire, and the only way to get through the collapse is with knowledge, is with the preservation of human knowledge, right? And you either the collapse is coming, and this guy Harry Seldon, he says the collapse is coming. You have the choice of 30,000 years of darkness, or you have the choice of putting resources into maintaining humanity's legacy, basically, and then we'll only have like 1,000 years of darkness or 500 years of darkness or whatever it was. And the trilogy or the series works out, and it's the growth of humanity after this crisis. And I think that one thing that this perspective in this particular, that sense, all that remains are other forms of wealth accumulated by the consumption of oil, soil, fertility, and rainforests. Humans are also consumed in this process, and if we're not maintaining humanity and learning and then writing it all down, that's the important part. If we can't remember what we did and all the humans that went into this, then we're squandering our natural resources, basically, I think.
And I think we can swirl all of this into a really nice whole, in that it's got to be, a peace treaty is consensual, and in order for something like this to end up in a consensual peace treaty, then the mindset has to think this kind of thing, right? If you're going to consent to it, you gotta be for it.
Yeah.
And I think we're quite a ways from being for this generally. I think there's a lot of, I'm drum I beat all the time is study history, and we don't study history. Like, a really broad swath of people don't study history. It's just not important. And when we do study history, it's not productive study. So by the time the mindset shifts to support this kind of thinking, then sure, you can put it in the peace treaty, but now you've got the mindset, and the mindset's going to do it whether it's in the peace treaty or not.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a chicken and an egg thing, and you can't put it in the peace treaty without the mindset anyway. So the mindset then becomes the thing that has to happen first. It's pretty interesting how all that swirls together.
Yeah. The philosophical underpinnings of like why, the value component of why you're entering into the treaty to begin with. It's like what you hope to achieve and what you hope to pass on and what you hope to preserve. Yeah, the knowledge. That's a good point, Chuck, that the cumulative knowledge of humanity it's kind of like the force multiplier of resource, essentially.
Or it's our main resource.
Well, I mean, I have a hard time with that, because if the natural world didn't exist, it wouldn't matter how much knowledge you had. So like, if you're like in a barren, destroyed, desert with all the, trees cut down everywhere, like, and you had all the knowledge in the world, but the water was poisoned. It's like, well, enjoy your knowledge,
Yeah, well, the knowledge, there is the knowledge to clean water, to clean dirty water. There's a knowledge to, build underground when we're irradiated on the surface. There's all sorts of, the knowledge is there to help us. But if we can't agree that it's worth preserving in the first place, and it just comes down, like Mike says, it's a respect for history.
Mm-hmm. Well, and the knowledge component is part of it is, I guess, maybe a wisdom. There's a wisdom component here too, which is like, don't poison the water, don't cut down all the forests, don't, et cetera, et cetera. And then your knowledge will be more valuable because you'll be able to apply your knowledge to resources that are still intact, and not like, you won't have to like, make up for lost time because you have destroyed, your environment.
One of the lines from the Foundation show, the series that I've been watching is we collect knowledge to make it through crisis points. And then at the, you know, you can be on autopilot when everything is nice and peaceful, and you can just live, right? The critical value of knowledge comes when everything gets changed abruptly, or when everything's wiped out, for example. That's when knowledge is really, really, really key. And that's why we have ancient knowledge. You know, the most ancient knowledge we have is stuff that's the most important, and which gets passed down, especially orally, right?
All right, guys, I have to be off the call at the bottom of the hour, and I hate interrupting people, so I should probably do it now before someone else starts talking, and I don't want to interrupt.
Just go.
Great conversation, guys. Thanks for being on.
Thank you.
Oh, you're gonna bounce now. Okay.
Yeah.
I thought you said.
Well, 2 minutes.
Bottom of the half hour.
Well,
we're gonna miss you.
Apparently, bottom of the hour is not a common expression. We say top of the hour, and then bottom of the hour.
It's like
that's if you put your clocks right side up.
Yeah, if it's not a digital watch and you have, you know, a linear belief in time. Yeah. Exactly.
What generation are you from? All right, man.
Well, yeah.
We'll try to carry on without you.
Cool. Catch you guys later.
Later.
See you, Mike. Thank you. Mm-hmm. Next page.
Dun, dun, dun. Well, the Mona Lisa portion is pretty good. Not all wealth is fungible and divisible. How do you divide the Mona Lisa?
I don't care about the Mona Lisa.
Okay, moving on. Tommy, what you got? Page 138.
Other people might value it more than me, I guess. But that's when you say, okay, we have this new property, which is a public property, like a blockchain. Everybody can use it. Everybody can chime in and mine some blocks and help the infrastructure. And it's valuable. So if you want a part of it, then you should know that there's an inflation that's eroding your share. And what Dan is suggesting is this magic, partly arbitrary number of 5%. So know that your part is getting eroded, and you have to keep on working to improve it. And you know, it's like the Red Queen saying we have to run very fast to stay in the same place, or else you go back.
Right. So that brings us to universal resource inheritance, kind of.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't highlighted this chapter as thoroughly as I would have liked, so I'm kind of leaning on you guys to like call. I'm reading right now, but
no, I went through it and I'm trying to remember what I highlighted in my mind. I'll put it that way.
Currency, I like this, since currency is effectively a claim on future resources. That's a lot. This inflation would seamlessly and transparently implement the principle of universal inheritance. I mean, this whole thing is kind of like the nugget right here, isn't it? Simple way to implement a universal loan of resources is to issue the community currency evenly to all people in the community. Every year, the community supply would grow. That's kind of what Ami was just talking about, by 5%. And the newly issued currency would be divided among the parties to the community peace treaty.
Yeah, and he's talking about currency and not money. So it's like the Mike Maloney distinction between the two. Mm-hmm. It's like a token that is separate from wealth, and it designates wealth in an unreliable way, or it's an indirect way. It doesn't have its intrinsic value, but you can use it now, and just know that it's going to be slowly deteriorate, and this is much better than fiat because it's out in the open and everybody knows that the rate of deterioration or inflation is 5% yearly, and just plan ahead. Or if your kids hate you for just spending it all, then it's on you.
Yeah.
And if they want to, they can regain whatever wealth they could have inherited by working hard and earning that back. But it's dynamic and it's fluid and it's open to anybody.
Yeah, his next under economic stability, wealth and power are tightly coupled. Any peace treaty must take measures to ensure that neither wealth nor power concentrates beyond a healthy Pareto distribution. This means that you cannot concentrate power in the name of decentralizing wealth, nor can you allow the concentration of wealth to such an extent that it creates a self-reinforcing concentration of power. And it comes right back to coercion. You know, if we're going to equate power with coercion or coercive capabilities, anyway.
Mm-hmm.
He does mention what the Pareto, you know, the extremes that come from communism, the extremes that come from, say, unbridled capitalism. It's hard. I hate using the word capitalism myself because it's pretty much right out of the Communist Manifesto, right? It's like I'm using a definition of something from a guy that I don't like, you know. And I don't like using the word capitalist to describe an ideal of private ownership and rights to improve yourself and everything. And Dan is this. I mean, in the book, he says much the same thing. We're trying to agree on different terms here, but yeah, capitalist is just. He says at the beginning of the chapter he's going to anger a lot of people.
Yeah,
capitalists, communists, anarchists.
Yeah.
They're all going to get angry equally from this chapter, and it comes from using these terms that everyone doesn't. You know, you don't agree on.
The
definitions of them.
See,
right?
see the chapter of ism schism. You know, it's like
yeah.
But there's another point, and right below the economic stability section, where I think this is a crucial. I kind of highlighted the whole thing, but maybe it's important to not do that because I think this point is crucial. In a free market with voluntary trade, capital and power will concentrate to gain larger economies of scale and efficiency. This brings down prices for everyone, but concentrates wealth. Wealth is a form of power which is earned by trade rather than by votes.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of interesting. It's like, even in a free and voluntary system of trade, you're going to end up with a Pareto distribution because people that are successful at trade are going to accumulate wealth. The wealth is going to give them more power.
It's very hard to eliminate the Pareto distribution. It comes up naturally in many systems.
Yeah.
And then, then that feeds really nicely into the paragraph that you just read. Wealth and power are tightly coupled. Must take measures to ensure that neither wealth nor power concentrates beyond a healthy Pareto distribution.
What's a healthy? Healthy? You know, who defines what healthy is? You know, again, it comes down to some sort of authority over this whole system.
I'll be the benevolent despot.
I'm with you.
Any peace treaty should factor in the need to protect from both extreme communism and extreme wealth inequality. It is for this reason that a flat wealth tax, whose proceeds are distributed evenly among the population, can make sense. The algorithmic redistribution is designed to prevent the tax revenue from empowering special interests and central planners. This cannot be overstated because communism typically fails because rulers take a larger cut of the wealth. They tax, which increases their power. An algorithmic redistribution denies rulers that power and therefore rebalances wealth without concentrating power.
So who writes that out? Who writes the algorithm, right?
Well, you use fractal democracy, obviously.
There we go.
And whoever writes the algorithm, and if it's a fractal democracy that decides on that, then it's not like they wrote it so they get the lion's share of the tax redistribution. It's not, right?
Yeah.
Well, and it can be rewritten, like this is policy. This is a policy level distinction. This needs to be downstream of how we allocate decision making through a fractal democracy process. So, yeah, there's so much here. It's like this is a really hard chapter to trim down.
Yeah, don't highlight everything. 50% of the page is good enough.
Yeah.
Choose the 50% you were going to highlight, and tough luck, you're out of the rest. Or less.
There are consequences.
Yeah, this is it. To implementing a basic inheritance, which must be acknowledged. Yeah. When you give people an inheritance, they may be inclined to live in near poverty rather than work. There is a marginal utility on your income where the first dollar earned is worth far more than the millionth. There's also marginal utility on your free time. In a world without a basic income, someone must trade their free time to work for money. Yeah. Implementing a basic inheritance. This UBI, which is coming, right? Here in Canada or Cananistan, whatever you want to call it, we're talking about. Sorry, this is not. It's not hypothetical, but it's not public knowledge, and I certainly don't know it. I'm just speculating based on what I read. But the next step in this whole lockdown experiment is to forgive debt of special people, of the people who have bought into the system, right? And I have, I've had discussions with idealistic people in my life who are in favor of a universal basic income, and it's just like, well, yeah, we'll get money, and the government's going to give us money, and we're going to buy what we need to live with it, and then everything else will just be gravy on top. We'll just work for fun or whatever. All the other stuff will just be perks. I'm like, okay, so what happens to the people who don't want to opt into that system? They're going to be marginalized and vilified, and eventually they're going to be eliminated. Again, I'm dwelling on the coercion that is sort of built into this whole chapter, but I think it's a big point. And just at the disclaimer from the beginning, it's going to piss a lot of people off, this chapter, and we are buying it. This is advocating society as a whole buying into a system, and it's going to, by definition, leave a portion of society out, because not everybody is going to buy into it, right?
But there is a fallacy somewhere, because even if everybody buys into it, what do you mean the government is going to give us money? Where is the money coming from? Are they going to print it? So you're going to have hyperinflation, and it's not going to buy you groceries or basic supplies.
And everything's going to collapse.
And it's going to collapse
a few years, right? Yeah.
You can't. Yeah. We can't conflate, though, what Dan is proposing in this chapter with the UBI schemes of the ruling elites of the world right now, because they're very different things.
They are. Yeah. But this peace treaty is it's similar to what we're experiencing in day-to-day life, where we're part of a society, and if you don't want to play by the rules, you're welcome to not be here anymore.
You're free.
It's your choice. You're free. Yeah, you're free to just not be part of regular society anymore. So it's your choice. It's a free choice. You can join this peace treaty or not. And I'm trying to apply this to what basically this isn't a roadmap to get from where we are to where we want to go. This is an ideal, and implementing this is the hard part.
Well, this needs to be understood in the context of all the other preceding chapters, and probably the ones that come afterwards, which include ideas such as right of secession, right of, like ability, like max limits on community size, like without any meaningful ability to like secede or to join a different group that feels a different way, then none of this, if this is all just a top-down dictatorship style like application of rules, then it's not at all what we're suggesting here.
Yeah.
Or what Dan is suggesting in this book.
I propose highlighting the paragraph before the last one. For this reason, wise community should tie the inheritance to match earned income. So you have to earn $5 before you can claim $5. I think that would keep people at a minimum of productivity instead of just being home and earning the minimum and spending that and complaining that it's not enough.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Work for who? Productivity measured by whom?
Well, if you earn $5 in the free market, then that's the judge, the free market. I know that the market is not so free anymore, but it's better than, I don't know, having that arbitrarily defined by your government.
I mean, I think we're imagining all of this taking place within, again, the context of all the preceding chapters. So when you take that paragraph and you say, let's just plop it into the current scenario that we're all living in, it doesn't sound so good. Because
it's hard to separate. Yeah, you're right.
But if you imagine that you're building this within the context of all the preceding concepts, then it sounds totally reasonable. It's like, well, then you have a democratic community from which you have the right to secede. That is,
and then it's a free market because it's a small community.
Yeah.
Or you can export to other independent communities around you.
Yeah. And then, like any community can make exceptions to stuff like this too. Like obviously elderly people, like wisdom keeper type people don't need to be necessarily gainfully employed. I mean, gainfully employed could be telling stories to the grandchildren. You know what I mean? Like there's a lot of different ways to
fireside chats.
What was that?
Fireside stories
chat.
Or fireside chat.
I mean, I think there's a lot of stuff that is hard to quantify, and obviously there needs to be allowances for stuff like that, and that's a community governance process, rather than some dictatorial sort of proclamation.
Mm-hmm.
I did think that was a really good point, though, he made up here, is like when he's talking about working, it's like it's the first dollar is the most valuable dollar, because without that they die. Once they've given up their time, it makes sense to maximize productivity. After all, if you must work hard 8 hours per day, you might as well work hard for $50 per hour instead of $10 per hour. Either way, you are paying the same price, 8 hours of hard work.
Mm-hmm.
It's like when you realize that time is the only, another resource, right? Time, you only have so many hours, so it doesn't change how much you're spending. You're spending that many hours, so you might as well maximize the value of your hours. That's gets us into the rat race that we're in now, but it's an interesting point. See if we can pick up the pace here. Anything on 141 that we need to pull out?
Yeah.
If you're cutting a cookie and had to choose between an equal share of 10,000 BCE and an equal share of 2020, what should you pick? Oh.
Was this written in 2020 or 2019?
2019. I mean, it's copyright 2019, but maybe it was mostly written in 2020. I don't know. Dan wrote it all the way up until he published it. So, productive society will naturally create surpluses which benefit the next generation. This is required for humanity to thrive and grow. We shouldn't attempt to limit future generations and attempt to make everyone equal any more than we should attempt to make everyone equal in this generation. I'm going to highlight everything if you don't stop me, Ami.
Yeah.
or Chuck. Well, the chance. Yeah.
Well, the part you highlighted is talking about the time axis, but if you look at the current generation and the inequality between the people who are descendants of conquerors and people who are descendants of the people that lost their land or their property or whatever, should we attempt to make everyone equal in this generation? So, or we shouldn't, because that's counterproductive, I think. We should try to improve the situation of everybody, not downgrade the people who are better off, but try to lift up the others, maybe. You want to read out loud what you highlighted?
Yeah, I was just reading the comments from Daniel, which I kind of fell behind on here.
Oh.
I'll just blaze through real quick. I agree that knowledge is our main resource. Without language and our ability to record it, we'd still be like every other animal. I might argue with that because I think animals are way awesomer than we give them credit for. Yeah. Isn't money a vote, though? If I spend my money on ice cream, I'm essentially voting for more ice cream to be made.
Animals don't have ice cream.
You don't know that.
Oh.
There are ants that cultivate, they farm fungus. That's pretty cool. Maybe it tastes like ice cream. I don't think that's true in my experience. People who get rich generally don't stop working, so I don't see any evidence for why having more money equals people not working. It's not really a free choice, though, unless you consider eating a free choice. Technically true, but not really. Yeah, I agree there. I think we should make everyone equal when it comes to resource. But how?
Yeah. Make is
keyword. Does that include your house and the person coming from the street and saying it's not fair that you live in this warm house and I'm out in the street? Give me, the living room.
Maybe equal in access to resources. It's kind of like the equity.
The person from the street will knock on your door and say, "I want equal access to your house."
Yeah.
Well,
what do you mean your house? It's our house.
All right. The other stuff I've highlighted, the presumption is that today's rich have earned it by virtue of their own intelligence and can invest it better. And it goes on. There's a lot of presumptions. The presumption is that one end of the bell curve, which wastes resources given to them, far outweighs the other end of the bell curve, which uses them in far more productive means. In other words, economic efficiency is a biased argument used to justify a biased status quo. It presupposes certain goals are higher than other goals. It assumes that some people do not have a right to participate in influencing which goods and services are provided. In effect, a universal inheritance becomes democratization of economic voting rights in the market. And I would say, again, back to like the grandmothers and the fireside stories, like I want the wisdom keepers in our society to have a say and not to just like they're not productive, contributors, so they don't have a say. Like that seems like a really backwards way to run your society. Like, like I want the daring and the boldness and the courage of the youth, and I want the wisdom of the elders, both. And if we just give all the power to the people that are like the most economically efficient in the moment, then we're kind of hosed, I think.
What about the old people that are not wisdom? They don't have wisdom, but they're old and you want to respect your elders, you have
Well,
to take care of
there's old
them.
people with bad ideas that have long since,
Yeah.
served their time, and then there's old people that have like really useful, like again, we were talking earlier about studying history and the importance of knowing history, and it's like I'm, you know, I'm right in the middle. I'm 46 now, and from my vantage point, the generation that's dying right now, like the 80 year olds and 90-year-olds that are dying right now, they remember a time, even if they're racist and bigoted and all the other terrible things, they still remember a time before some of the things that we're being introduced to now that are being kind of passed off as normal. And just that awareness and the ability to be like, something's not right. I remember when, we had this kind of relationship with, the land, or this kind of ability to move about freely, or this, it's like that knowledge of that remembering is so important, that we preserve and let it inform the way we make decisions in the present about how to allocate resources, or how to, whatever, how to not turn into a totalitarian dictatorship. like
Well, I'm 51 years old, and I remember a time where we could travel to Europe and go skiing for a week and come back. Yeah, I
yeah,
remember that.
yeah. I mean, we're like an interesting age set here. I think we're between 44 and 51, and I'm 46, right in the middle. And yeah, like Chuck and I were talking yesterday, like, we both grew up in an era where, I mean, I grew up pre-internet, as did we all here, but now the younger generation is like pretty much growing up in a purely connected landscape, and they don't know what it was like to go run off all day without any parents knowing where you were, and just
Mhm.
disappear in the woods and make forts and like do things that were probably really dangerous, but no one was like looking over our shoulders. Um,
Yeah.
and frankly, like, my parents were way more industrious and capable than I am in their time. I mean, they grew up on farms, and they had to like darn their socks, and like, they had like valuable life skills that were like even my generation doesn't have. But like my generation, our generation can see that generation and can see the current crop, and I think we have a unique vantage point. Like, oh, whoa, we're making a huge
Mhm.
transition here from like the last bastion of self-sufficiency to like total dependency, because we can see both worlds from our vantage point. And so for me, it's just highlighting the need for not losing those older traditional ways.
My mother-in-law talks about being able to get onto the school bus with her rifle, her 22.
Yeah.
As a kid,
Yep.
everybody would take their rifles to school. And
Yeah, same. Yep. I mean, I didn't, but my parents, yeah, generation.
And shoot the birds on recess.
Yeah, certainly weren't shooting each other.
Yeah, they're just like, yeah, it
Well,
wasn't.
yeah, birds are natural resources. Let's shoot some.
Your fellow classmates are not.
Yeah.
Okay, lesson number 1.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Your classmates are natural resources. They're just not consumable.
Right. Yeah.
Mm.
Just
Yeah.
don't squander them.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'll get off my soapbox here. Blah blah.
Well, I mean, the irony here in this paragraph, the irony is that a wealth tax is also central planning. So we are all guilty of central planning.
Yeah.
The only thing that isn't centrally planned is the law of the jungle, in which case there is no property except that which you can physically defend. And it's just like, we're agreeing to a certain level of coercion, and I have to get past this. But how much is acceptable, And I think overall the chapter is great because it it lays out a possibility. The numbers and 5% is whatever. It's malleable, but it's the admission that if we're going to live together, we have to agree on something, and we have to agree that we're going to plan together. It's a step. It's the whole book is about the next step away from the bare law of the jungle, right? And
and the rest of that paragraph is really solid too. He says the only thing that
any system which allows wealth inequality to grow too far will ultimately revert to the law of the jungle.
Yep.
As the poor rise up and burn the place down. A gradual wealth redistribution is likely to create a more stable and prosperous society than one which goes through violent turmoil every couple of generations.
Yep. Yeah. It's taking the long view. It's like, this is what I've always called enlightened self-interest when defending social policies. I'm like, well, you can try to like hoard everything to yourself and just be like, me, mine, like I got it, so it's mine kind of attitude. Or you can be like, well, that's really not sustainable in the long run because you have neighbors and you have to deal with trade and resources, and eventually it's going to devolve, and this is exactly what happens. And so let's not do that. Let's play a different game. Like
there's a Beatles song, I, Me, Mine.
Oh, right. Yeah. I knew I was pulling that from somewhere deep in my subconscious.
I, Me, Mine. Yeah.
I, Me, Mine. What would your inheritance buy?
Yeah, this is nice. Doing some, back of the envelope calculations on redistributing the whole world's wealth to the whole world's population, and coming up with surprising numbers.
Yeah, total income of about 4,000 per year, or 333 per month. Over 4 times the median income in Africa. Obviously, implementing such a distribution process difficult, not very appealing to citizens of wealthier industrialized countries. It's like the carbon situation. Like if you say, I know we don't all agree or care about this from the same vantage point. Well, actually, the 3 of us probably agree, but anyway, people that might be watching have different feelings about carbon. But it's like the industrialized countries that have benefited from all the development of using all this carbon now want to restrict that ability by the so-called developing world that still has yet to use their allotment of carbon, as it were, if they were to catch up to the consumption that industrialized nations have already done. So it's like it becomes this very strange control mechanism.
Guilt-based.
Well, yeah, and then it just becomes economic at some point. And just if it's written into laws, and you're controlled by what you can and can't do, or can and can't use resource-wise. I mean, I'm generally in favor of us destroying the land less, but again, it becomes like, well, you want a one world government that says like who can do what? Like that becomes problematic for other reasons, I'm still trying to find process. The point of this discussion is to demonstrate that using a process derived, did I make this small for some reason? There we go. We can derive a basic income that is in the same ballpark as what is often proposed. Furthermore, we can do so by not asking how much money is needed, but by asking how much wealth is available to pass on to the next generation at 5% per year. To summarize, a wealth tax of 5% per year would give everyone an income above the poverty line without violating the fairly negotiated property rights of any generation. it's really hard to summarize this scheme without just reading.
Yeah,
it all.
it's I mean, the numbers themselves are fairly theoretical, but we're trying to arrive at something that makes sense and something that everybody would be up for, or at least most people would be up for.
Yeah.
I still keep coming back to the right of secession.
Chuck's like, I'm out of here.
Because eventually, when these systems break down, every system breaks down eventually.
But we will.
What does that look like?
One.
What's that? We're going to build the perfect one.
But we'll be the ones that invent the first perfect one, Chuck.
Yeah.
Don't you understand?
Yeah. What does secession from this look like? It looks like it looks like 5-10% of the population decided they don't want to play because they're not being treated well, and then they decide to opt out, and then they are scapegoated and lynched, to use the technical terms.
Yeah.
There's another way, Chuck. I think it's if you really want to succeed, but it's going to be an effort, and you're going to have to work twice as hard. You're going to have to work in the real life and pay taxes and stay in the regular system, because you can't escape it. But you can, in parallel, build another community and people who are like-minded. And since it's going to take a lot of effort and going to be hard, and it's going to be tough finding people like that, so it's probably going to be online and virtual and not land-based. So there's not going to be a piece of land where you can draw a border and say, I'm out of the USA, I'm not paying federal taxes, bite me. You're going to keep on paying that taxes, but you're going to have to work on preparing the next, and you're going to have to set an example for people with this new community. Yeah. Hopefully, it's going to be easier for the next one or the next ones to become a reality.
Yeah, and the only way to, like you're saying, the only way to really implement this is to enmesh different societies inside each other. Like we have a physical town, and all of the people are in the physical town, but 10% of them aren't participating in this economy, but they still have, it's hard. The implementation of an ideal is, where do you start? And it starts. I agree. It starts with everybody talking. It starts with the practical democracy. Ami, I think your mic just went really hot.
You're back. I just temporarily muted you, but I unmuted
you. Okay, thanks.
I think you turned up your mic.
It's back.
Can you hear me?
Oh, yeah, we can.
That's better now.
Yeah. Rami joined, and people in the West wouldn't like that very much. No, they wouldn't, Rami. They would not. Most definitely, assuredly, not like that. Who's replying to this? Maybe my house would be smaller, but I'd be fine with that if that means someone else also got a home. But I want
that's temporary. That's not the end of it, Daniel. Your house is going to be smaller, but then a year and a half after that, it's going to be smaller still, because you're going to have to adjust again. And it's not going to stop there. It's going to get smaller and smaller. It's like a race to the bottom.
It can't be thought of as money anymore if it's all distributed equally, because then material value will no longer have any meaning. It's only has meaning as long as it's unequal.
This paragraph, political philosophers and economists have proposed many different implementations of UBI, almost all of which will end in hyperinflation and economic destruction. The needs-based argument for UBI creates an unsustainable economic chain of events where UBI triggers price increases, which trigger additional needs-based increases to UBI. And it's that needs-based thing that that's how they're selling UBI right now. You're not going to have to worry about your survival.
Mm-hmm.
But this UBI that Dan is talking about is not needs based.
Yeah, and I'll get onto that in a second. I just want to make sure this is. I almost overwrote this today, and it has notes from a previous. Okay. Yep, it is possible to support a universal inheritance supported by a wealth tax while being a logically consistent, economically sound libertarian. In fact, it may be the only logically consistent theory of property rights that could be broadly accepted by the masses while automatically correcting for past and injustices. Oh, that's an edit, I think.
Yeah, cross out the end. Yeah.
Or the past and injustices.
I think while automatically correcting for past injustices. Yeah.
I don't know how to do that with this, but I know I'll add a note.
Yeah. On the other hand, this nuanced position might be lost on the masses who would not understand the reason behind their inheritance. Without a proper understanding, the masses may simply call for more whenever their inheritance doesn't support the standard of living they want. Through their own ignorance and selfish desires, the masses can quickly turn a stable economic system of 5% inflation a year into an unstable communist system that forces everyone to the lowest common denominator. And that's the danger that I see in any UBI. And it takes education, it takes understanding, it takes that common peace treaty that everybody in the town or society or economy or whatever is going to agree to. It all comes down to knowledge, doesn't it? It comes down to preserving history and preserving an understanding of why we're doing things. Because most people, I say most, but I think the majority of people just don't understand. Maybe they haven't been trained to care about understanding of it. I don't know what the problem is in the grand scheme of things, but most
it's
people
a complicated subject.
Yeah,
but you have to invest and you have to put an effort to learn that. And 5% seems arbitrary. Why not 6 or 7 or 5.5? And let's move it up a little bit, so it's going to be better in the short term.
When your UBI doesn't, and you're at the back of the bread line, and your UBI, they've run out of bread, or for example, because it was priced too cheaply, and the people in front of you bought it all. Anyway, I'm always a worst case Ontario kind of guy, but it's you can analyze this to death, and you can figure out where all the potential pitfalls are, but it just comes down to people understanding the whole point of that the UBI historically.
There's another aspect to it, and that maybe you need to think of that in small communities of 10,000 people or less. So if your community decides they want 6 or 7%, you can switch to another one, and it's going to be easy if there are multiple like these societies. And maybe it's going to be easier to convince people in your 10,000 group that it's not wise to move it up to 6 or 7%.
And you're going to be able to argue that based on evidence, right? There's going to be evidence of failures of that system in order for you to
in your neighboring communities. I think we have more than 50% of the page covered with green paint.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the concluding page, so I'm gonna.
Okay.
Yeah, it's the synopsis of everything here.
Yeah,
Like, only through continuous education and affirming from one generation to the next can a people hope to create and maintain such a system without falling victim to philosophical corruption. And that word only through continuous education and affirming from one generation to the next. So that right there is only through knowledge of history
yep.
can this system work.
And passing that knowledge on to transmitting it to like from one generation to the next, i.e. wisdom keepers.
In which case, we're agreeing that humanity's corpus of knowledge is a natural resource, and it's a key natural resource.
And it had to be renewed frequently.
Yeah, and preserved. Yeah,
you have to drill that into the minds of people, and they keep on getting born, and you get new ones all the time.
Yeah, and they're born, they don't know anything.
Yeah,
Gotta
fix this. Yeah,
what is that?
I like to differentiate knowledge and wisdom, though. I think knowledge is knowledge. Knowledge is the body of ideas that have been accumulated, like good ways to do things and like how to implement and how to extract and various like techniques and tools. But wisdom is the ability to use knowledge in a good way. And
I think wisdom is knowledge plus time.
Right.
Or times time.
Times time. Yeah. Wisdom is like, well, we had the knowledge to split the atom, but maybe that wasn't such a good idea. Or, we had the knowledge to implement technology X, but, it caused a bunch of undesirable side effects. So we no longer use that technology. And yeah, I think in the same way, it's that, like, this is a, in some ways, I think this is like part of a greater wisdom tradition that needs to be developed. The whole, I don't think it begins and ends with Dan's book. I think it needs to incorporate a bunch of other components. But this is a crucial piece of it on the governance side. And some of these observations are priceless. All property rights are derived from a peace treaty agreed to by independent parties able to negotiate freely with the ability to say no. A wise society negotiates a peace treaty that is sustainable across many generations and doesn't get undermined as the balance of power among the parties to the treaty evolves over time. Yeah, so much of this is just culturally enforced,
Yep.
It's like that part, like, doesn't get undermined as the balance of power among the parties to the treaty evolves over time. Well, that's a real challenge right there, right? Why? That's like a moral conundrum, right? Like, I mean, we're right back to Europe invading North America. It's like, well, maybe not really, because there was no pre-existing peace treaty there, but like, yeah, like say you and your neighbors had a peace treaty, but then you suddenly had an advantage after like several years. You had more oxen, more, more timber, more whatever, because you just made better use of your time and more more numbers of people in your family because you'd fed them better. And what's to keep you from just being like, you know what, we're just going to take your land and take your, it's like you had a peace treaty, but now there's a power differential. And one party is perhaps tempted to exploit that power differential for more gain, for the benefit of their clan, like what, that's the tricky part, I think.
Do you think in the far future, fractal democracy would be so powerful that it would just conquer the rest of the world by force and make them our slaves?
Wouldn't force be like kind of antithetical to the?
No, but they didn't have the wisdom to invest time and effort in learning about this great new idea. And I'm talking about the dystopian outcome for this utopian idea, which happened several times during history, I think, in many different
Right.
parts
Yeah.
of the world.
Well, that's yeah.
We're going to enlighten them by force. Yeah,
We just have to
make them.
Yeah.
We're going to make it. We're going to accelerate their evolution of their understanding.
Yeah, totally.
And
they'll understand. Their children will understand.
Until they actually learn, they can cut the trees and bring us water from the well, which
That's
is
right.
far away.
I think that's the situation we're in now, only it's a different ideology that's being proposed. And I think fractal democracy can take hold. Honestly, I see it as like a self-replicating kind of thing that can allow independent communities to kind of hold their ground long enough to then federate with other independent communities that can also hold their ground. And maybe if that idea can take hold peacefully and transmit throughout the world, then we have a chance for humanity not being living under like a one world government type situation, which I see as supremely undesirable.
Oh, I'm happy with a one world government as long as it's the right one.
With me on top, yeah.
No, I don't need to be on top. It just needs to be formed well, right? But
or you don't mind me being on top? Okay, thanks.
I think one.
I didn't say that. I said formed well.
Yeah, but
I promise I will form it.
How do you secede?
Yeah.
How do you secede from a one world government? Is the
Yeah.
problem?
Oh, you don't.
Yeah, no.
You're gonna be happy. You're gonna own nothing. Be happy, and I'm gonna take care of you. Don't worry.
Yep.
I'll just go live in a hut by the river. I think before that happens.
Put the hash of this video on chain, and don't worry about it.
Yeah. It's the right of secession, which is it's behind everything in this argument, right? If people can't peacefully live together and they can't peacefully secede from each other, it's because they're not coming from the same philosophical grounding, right? And there is a place for the philosophy, but it's to find out what to teach people and what to learn and what to look at and what kind of what we're going to learn from history. We have to be able to identify what is valuable with what came before us, what's worth conserving.
Mm-hmm.
I guess that's the word. That's where the word conservative comes from. It's like, and I love Jordan Peterson's angle on it. It's like, how about we just start by not tearing everything down, right? Let's just do that, right?
Yeah.
Just show some respect for your parents. The patriarchy, the word, it just comes from respect for your father, right? And how about we just don't tear everything down, and we'll go from that point, right? and it's the same. It's the same as this. We need to find that common philosophical grounding, or else secession is going to be really messy and very painful for the people who get scapegoated. I'm using that word. I don't know if I can bring it up and flog it, but I'm a big fan of Rene Girard, who is he's a philosopher, linguist, historian, who's a huge influence on Peter Thiel. Actually, Peter Thiel put a bunch of money into a foundation called Imitatio, which is the whole point of the foundation is spreading the teachings of Rene Girard, right?
Huh.
And what he teaches is that history is defined by populations getting together, a mob forms, they identify somebody who's causing them trouble, they scapegoat them, meaning they put the community's problems on that person's head, or that population's head, and then they lynch them, and then there's a mass catharsis in the society because peace has come thanks to the killing of this victim or this population, right? And you see that all through history.
That's
Everything.
totalitarianism. Yeah.
It's everything. It's what we're looking at right now when people in our very communities say, why can't these people just do what's right? I just wish they would die. And I hear that, it's for the greater good. I just wish these people would do what's right, or they shouldn't even exist anymore. Right. Anyway, that's the scapegoating, and it comes up over and over again all through history. It basically shapes history. It defines, it is history. And the story of managing that dynamic is how we get through history. But Rene Girard, he's a monster.
Well, on that, like, there's a great, I think it's Matthias Desmet. He's a PhD in Ghent University, professor of clinical psychology.
Mm-hmm.
He's writing a book on, I think it's called Totalitarianism, and he discusses the psychology of totalitarianism.
Mm-hmm.
And we're way off topic, but just this is if you stayed with us this long, this is like
this is your punishment for saying
this. Is your punishment,
yeah.
Punishment. Thank you, Ami. Yeah, and I can't do it as well as he does, obviously, because he studies this. But he basically talks about the underlying conditions that give rise to totalitarianism, and he distinguishes totalitarianism from a dictatorship. And totalitarianism is more like, he describes it like there are certain conditions that need to come about for it to rise. And one is free-floating anxiety, what he describes as free-floating anxiety. Like the population is anxious, but they don't know what about. There's just so many things going on that they can't control. They have a lot of anxiety. And he says, like if you're faced with the threat of a tiger, you would know you're anxious about the tiger, and psychologically that's not a bad place to be, because at least you know how to respond to that source of anxiety. You run, you fight, whatever you got to do. But in our modern world, we have all these anxieties. We don't really know what to connect them to exactly. And the second one is isolation. People feel a sense of isolation from one another, and we know that that's on the rise everywhere if you just look at any statistics at all. And the third one is meaninglessness, which again, if you look at some statistics on like how many people feel a sense of meaning in their current work, it's a staggeringly low number. There's like, I think one study was like 65% of respondents said that their job didn't matter at all, that it didn't matter one bit to the world what they were doing.
Yeah.
So there's
bullshit
like
jobs.
Yeah, bullshit jobs, exactly. And then so there's that's a book, right? So there's meaningless, there's this free floating anxiety, there's isolation, there's meaninglessness, and then the fourth condition was like I can't remember what he called it, but it's something to do with like aggression. Like people had this, like, as a result of these three things, people had this aggressive feeling, like they wanted to like lash out, to like unwind these issues that they're feeling. And then if these conditions are in place and a narrative emerges where it's like, what the source of your troubles is, it's this, then it solves all the problems for all those people, because now they can fixate on that object of whatever the trouble is. Say it's COVID, say it's the unvaccinated, or the women. In the case of the witch trials, it's the women. They're the source of all your troubles. Then now it's like everyone in that group is they solved the loneliness problem because they're all banded together. That anxiety is no longer free floating, it's directed, which is much less painful. And they have meaning again, because their meaning is in uniting together to defeat this external enemy
or internal.
And now they have some place for their aggression to go.
Yep.
But interestingly, he said that all totalitarian regimes eventually destroy themselves, and that the best way to survive is to like get outside of it as much as possible in a pair and live in a parallel structure, or you have to flip the 30% that are driving it. Well, the 30% that are driving it, he said, like the middle 40 just is following them, and there's another 30% that's like, I don't think this is right, and that outlier 30% can flip the middle 40% if they have a coherent, unified narrative that they can, like, grab them with. But absent that, he's like, just get out of the way, because and he points to, like, in Stalinist Russia, where after they'd killed and starved all the people that weren't in the club, then eventually they turned to the loyal Communist Party members, and he said that they killed over 50% of the loyal members, and that the members that were sentenced to death thought that they deserved it. And I guess historians are just, like, astonished at, like, how, like, all the people that were killed that were loyalists were like, yep, I did something wrong, I need to be sacrificed also. And eventually, like, how it just consumes itself because it runs out of victims, like in the witch trials. Like there were like there were European villages where they just literally killed every woman, and there were just no one left to kill. So they're like, well, and then it died out. But, like, I mean, obviously that's a horrible way to resolve like it's like a wildfire,
Rene Girard uses the term it's mimesis, mimetic, where we copy each other. It's the one thing that humans are good at is copying one another, and desire is copied. We don't really desire things for their value, for their intrinsic value. We desire them because somebody else desires them, because somebody else, so we
see that in kids all the time.
Exactly. Yeah. We copy everything. We copy language. We learn everything through copying, but then we copy also this source of conflict. And when it becomes a feedback loop, and he calls it mimetic contagion, and the mob takes over, and it identifies a victim, sacrifices the victim, and then there's calm. And that's exact. It is history.
Same process. I might have to read him, Rene Girard. I've got it written down. Or her, him. He
was a professor at Stanford when Thiel was there.
Okay.
And he just died a couple years ago. But
interesting that Thiel is into him.
He basically shaped Thiel, and Thiel admits that, or professes it.
Interesting.
Are you familiar with the term shock-induced aggression? Have you heard of that? There was an experiment on rats where they put a rat in a cage and they electrified the floor and they would shock him. So this poor rat didn't know what to do. There was nothing he could do, and he just suffered in silence and learned to live with that. And
calmly.
When they put they did the next step of the experiment was putting two rats in a cage and electrifying the floor, but then they would start biting each other and fight each other because it was obvious it was the other one doing them harm. And they didn't notice the guy in the white coat, in the lab coat outside. And sometimes I think we're the rats, and the people that are saying you will own nothing and be happy are the ones in the lab coat outside. And us fighting each other.
And Girard, his main point is that the only way to get through that urge for violence is through conscious practicing of nonviolence. Right. Nonviolence is the only way to get through mimetic contagion, where a culture is tearing itself apart. We're on the cusp of it right now. You can feel it, and the only way through it is to not fight each other. Ironically enough,
I think unity, like promoting the opposite of division, essentially de-other. I have a friend or someone I met some years ago now that her whole work is on de-otherizing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's such a cool way to look at it. It's like, because it's exactly in these moments where we want to make everybody into an enemy or into like the other.
Mm-hmm.
And once you do that, like all bets are off, you know. But if you can restore, even if one side just does it for the other side, there's still a chance. You know, it doesn't even need to be mutual. If there's still one side that recognizes humanity, even the victim recognizing the aggressor humanity, like there's still a chance,
Mm-hmm.
like depending on the situation. But if both sides have just decided that the other is no longer human, essentially, then it's just game off, you know, or game on, I guess, in law of the jungle terms. So,
Yep.
Yeah. Boy, this has been the most dystopian and darkest chapter, I think.
It's a difficult chapter.
Yeah. Hey, the disclaimer's right up front. This is where the where the argument.
Smart contracts is going to be a much easier subject, I think.
Yeah.
It's a more neutral idea.
We won't
It's
get
logic.
into
Yep.
genocide or totalitarianism with smart contracts, I don't think. Well,
no, it's smart contracts contrasted with promissory contracts.
Yeah, it's the title transfer theory of contract chapter is really what it is. So, new theory of contracts and how to avoid promissory forms of contracts.
Yeah, whoever is watching, we promise it's going to be a much nicer.
You would say that. De-otherizing, I like that. Yep, that's what we got to do. Shout out for de-otherizing. And all right, guys, we should wrap it up. You guys can stay and chat for a second if you want. I'm going to end the broadcast. We'll see. Hopefully, I think we can do this continuously week after week now until we're through the book. That's my hope. We had a couple weeks during the madness there, and hopefully we can keep the momentum up. So next Friday, same bat time, same bat channel. See you then.
Okay.